Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Whittle's Read. Today, well, as you can probably see from the title, this is a book chat about Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell.
Hey guys, Editing Lachlan here. So, I've been trying this new filming location and I'm liking it. It's pretty good. The only problem is that, because I'm filming this on my phone, I have no viewfinder. And as such, I really have to guess at the framing and get it kind of okay and then just hope for the best. And in this video, I've just got this whole left-hand side of the wall just empty and it's really pissing me off. And so I've decided the best fix is I'm just going to put up some puppies. Every once in a while, during the video when I'm talking about Orwell and, socialism and the problems of capitalism and all that stuff, this is going to be a cute puppy. And I think that's going to be the best thing for everyone. So enjoy the puppies and enjoy the video. Bye.
If you're interested, the rest of these books, the books I read in September and will be, talked about more in an upcoming video, a September wrap-up or something like that. But yeah, the book I really want to talk about is Down and Out in Paris and London. I'm going to leave it over there rather than picking it up because I'm good at some things, but apparently one thing I'm really shit at is just holding a book to camera. I am constantly just waggling it about, and then I look at it for a bit, and then I just put it down, and it's just, I assume it's horrible to watch, so I'm just going to have it there, and it's going to stay standing, and you can see it. So, hopefully that's a better solution. But now let's talk about the actual book, what we're here to do. This book is a memoir. It's the first book George Orwell actually ever published, and it talks about his life. The title is quite literal. Down and Out in Paris and London. He is down on his luck. At first in Paris and then later on in London. He starts off as an English teacher. He then loses his students and has to pawn his clothes and, have to hide his financial situation from his landlady or he'll be thrown out, and the apartment he lives in anyway is covered in bugs and is just in a disgusting state. He ends up getting to the point where he is completely out of money and has starved for several days. And eventually finds a job working as a plongeur, which is, I believe, the French word for dishwasher, in a restaurant, where he works for at least 14 hours a day for 6 days a week, next to, in the basement, next to the boiler, in sweltering hot conditions, and he just washes dishes all day. And he is so thankful for that, because the alternative was starving, even though it is working him to a point of, physical exhaustion for one. He then goes to a different restaurant, which is a complete mess, and eventually comes to the point where he just can't stand it anymore, and he messages a friend back in London to try to get him a job where he has to do almost nothing in England. And he does get that job, and he shows up for it, for his friend to tell him he's actually gone away for a month, the person you're meant to work for, and so you're going to have to handle it for a month, but I'm sure you can do that, right? The answer is no, he can't do that. He tries to survive on what money he has. He pawns his clothes again. He goes to the cheapest accommodation he can find, where there are 40 men in a single room with chamber pots, most of whom are homeless and unemployed and sick. And he is just trying to survive. It gets to the point where he can't even afford those and has to go to spikes, which are houses where tramps go for the night, because it's completely free, but literally you're put in this room, locked up until morning, and then let go. And the entire purpose of this is to keep people off the streets, but in doing so, are just treating them... I'm going to get into that afterwards. But he just works through that until he's just trying to survive until that month's out. Now, that sounds very bleak, and that might just be me being a pessimist, but honestly this book it isn't that bleak an experience. Orwell introduces some brilliant characters, and as this is a memoir, I believe they're all based off of real people, which actually made me a bit happy. And there's some really hilarious moments in there. There's points where I laughed out loud. There's points where he's enjoying life and living it. And one thing that's interesting, I have to say, I misrepresented Orwell in a previous video. Whilst I'm sure, and I hope, no one is getting an impression of Orwell off of me, I painted Orwell. All I knew of Orwell was 1984 and Animal Farm, and I knew very little about him otherwise. And whilst he is, and I was correct in saying, anti-communist, he is also anti-capitalist. So, whilst he does criticize both sides, he is still a socialist, and so his criticisms of authoritarianism, more so than communism, make far much more sense in this context. And so I just wanted to point that out, But the thing is, because this is Orwell's first book, the political commentary is extremely light. You know, this is obviously a young person who does not have the confidence or arrogance, depending on what you can say, to make sweeping political judgments, which is shocking to me because this is a memoir. This is his life. Of any point in any of his writing where he could have made some really, well-informed points, it's right here. But he doesn't massively. And that actually, whilst, I do say that, I think it does make the book better. Because the book isn't political. The book's not about that. It's not about some grand sweeping criticism of society. He talks about how thankful he is for his job. How thankful he is not to be starving at the moment, even though the work is horrific and brutal. And, he talks about how there are people far worse off than him. And I feel that's very effective. Because for me, what made me angry, because that is one thing this book did make me angry, is the sadness of his acceptance of the situation. Where it wasn't up, I could have just read someone go on a rant about why this is unfair, and I could have gone, yep, that's unfair, and not really thought about it. I could have just kind of let it wash over me, and that be it. But the fact that I was the one who had to do the thinking on why it was so monstrably wrong made it so much more impactful. And I don't know if that was a masterstroke by Orwell. Probably. He was a pretty good writer, some people think. So maybe that was the intention. But, what he talks about for the rest of it, he makes no grand sweeping point. He just talks about the reality. And the reality in itself is somewhat political if you look at it that way. And, there is no right way to read a book. If you don't want to look into that, that's fine. And also this book is, from the 30s. And so people might look at it and think, oh, but this situation is entirely in the past and everything has changed now, which it hasn't. So, you can read this and just have a fun time learning about what Paris was like and what London was like and his struggles and how he got through them, because it's very interesting. It's a very interesting and fun read. It's not just this bleak, depressing thing. But now I'm going to talk about why I found it bleak and depressing. Which is not a bad thing, because it does so in an artful way, in a meaningful way. Orwell just presents, he only goes into criticism for 2 chapters in the entire book, one at the end of the Paris section and one at the end of the London section. At the end of the Paris section, he just talks about the life of a plongeur, which is probably me pronouncing that word horrifically wrong. I apologize to any French listeners or watchers, and if you want to correct me, or just yell at me for a bit, please do somehow, comments or whatever. Talking about how, what's the point? I actually, before filming this video, just opened the chapter and read through it again, because it's probably my favourite chapter of the entire book, and it was the chapter that made me angry. Talking about how, what's the point? We have people working for 14 hours a day, working themselves to the bone, to the point where they are making almost no money, because, he talks about this entire hierarchy within the chain of a hotel, and, plongeur is right at the bottom. Right at the bottom. You're scum, basically, and everyone else can do what they will with you. And just talking about this helplessness, that there's nothing you can do about it. And that is one thing he does excellently, is he talks about these unending cycles of poverty, which are things I've been aware of, but I haven't been described to me in such detail. You're a plongeur, so you work 14 hours a day for 6 days a week. The one day you have off, you sleep the clock around. If you do have any extra money, you spend it on food, you spend it on life, you spend it on trying to find the will to live, to work another 14-hour day, so you go to the bistro and drink. That's what people do. Because there's no point in saving, because ultimately you'll never be able to save up much. So why bother? Because you'll never be able to have a wife, you'll never be able to afford a home, you'll never have any prospect beyond being a plongeur, so there is really no point in anything. And so what is the point of this job? And Orwell says that the point is purely to have a job and purely for people to be in work. Because ultimately, he was saying, when you're talking about coal mining is a very difficult job and a very intense, menial job, more so than dishwashing. Though, honestly, the way he describes it, standing for 14 hours a day, washing dishes next to a furnace, on very little food with almost no breaks, consistently, it's a brutal life. But he never tries to extract sympathy. He never tries to make you pity him. That's never the point. And sorry, that's a very important point I needed to make, but returning to it. But you need coal. Without coal, a country doesn't run. You need people to chop down trees. You need these big tasks, because if they don't happen, the city will collapse. Do you need restaurants? Really? Do you need someone working 16 hours a day to wash dishes? Or could you instead just have a smaller restaurant that makes less money, or have no restaurant at all because you just eat at home with food that's as good quality, if not better? Because, he talks about the restaurants being absolutely filthy, disgusting places, and it's made me never want to eat at a restaurant again, to be honest. Which is kind of what he wants to happen, so, maybe that was a plan all along. But, yeah, what's the point? What's the point of ruining your life and spending it in this horrific way? And the answer, he doesn't have one. And it's just, people just believe that having a job is good and that work is in itself good, even if it's for no purpose and it kills you in the process. And then he talks about tramping and how, also, I should say, tramp I do not believe is a politically correct term at this point. I'm only using that word because that is the word that Orwell uses, and I do not want to misrepresent what he's saying, because a tramp, the difference, there is a difference there between a tramp, as Orwell describes, and a homeless person. And so, whilst I do not think you should go around calling every homeless person a tramp, I don't think that's correct. And not just politically correct, I think it's just factually incorrect. Because, the way that, what a tramp is, in London at least, Orwell describes, is someone who, you have these boarding houses, which they're called spikes, which will house you for a single night, but you can't stay there for more than one night a month, otherwise the threat is jail. So, and the reason for this, I assume, is never said, is, you don't want a bunch of tramps all in one place, but the reason that they have it at all is because they don't want tramps on the streets, for some reason. Because they're dangerous, potentially, which is a lie, because 3 unarmed men are the people that manage these hundreds of tramps, and that tramps have such a broken will that there is nothing aggressive they would do. But the proper answer is probably just to try to distract from the problem of these thousands of people out of work and starving. So you stay at that place for one night, and then you have to get to the next one, so you can stay there that one night, that one next night. And so that's a 14-mile walk, so you spend your entire day walking in, broken shoes, all barefoot, from one house to the next, to the next, to the next, and that's your entire life. That's all you can do. And even if you got a job tomorrow, if they don't pay you till the end of the week, you've got nowhere to sleep. You'd have to go to a spike, and if you wanted to go to a spike, you'd have to walk 14 miles away and walking back 14 miles the next day, or you try to sleep on the street, but if you fall asleep on the street, the police wake you up because they don't want you to die of exposure, which is a lie, because the thing that Orwell says is, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die anyway, I might as well die sleeping. I don't think that's a paraphrase, that isn't exactly it. But just saying that is an excuse. And just this system has been built seemingly purposefully, and he believes purposefully, to keep these people constantly in this cycle that they can never break of just abject poverty. The reason, he claims, and I don't say he claims to say I do not agree with it, is because there is this image of the tramp monster, that anybody who does not make money for themselves or someone else must be horrific, that the only reason that someone could not be functioning in a capitalist society is purely because they are broken, or they are evil, or there is something wrong with them. And if you did constantly give people in these horrible situations the opportunity to get out of them, they could then say, I was only in that situation because of the system. That it wasn't my fault, that I have now proven, if you gave them the chance to prove that they are worthy members of society, you'd have to understand that all the people in this situation are capable of being worthy members of society. So it is far easier and simpler for it to be ignored. And so it is. And these people just try to survive, and that is it. It takes all of their energy, which isn't much because they survive entirely in a diet of 2 slices of bread, margarine, and a tea. Everyone smokes, so the poor pick up cigarette butts off the street and smoke those, because that's their only source of tobacco. And so, but then again, I'm talking about how bleak it is, and it is, but only when one realizes that things aren't that different now than they were then. it's not been a very long time since this. It's been almost 100 years, which is, frankly, nothing. But there are some beautiful insights. There's this character, I think referred to as Bozo, who is a screever, and what that is a street artist. He draws on the pavements, and he draws political cartoons, and he's very good at it. And he's this person who used to be quite well off. He was engaged to a French woman in Paris who then got hit by a bus. And so he fell to the drink, which got him fired, which got him homeless, which meant he moved back to the UK, which was his home country, where he had no job. So instead he started painting on the sidewalk because he just had nothing left to do. And it's a way of surviving. And he has his art. And he is quite learned and, tells Orwell to look up at the stars and see, this is what's there and that's what's there. And then he's written a few pieces about comets and written them to the Royal Observatory, who've given him letters of thanks in return. He's this man who's just living life. He's got a mangled leg from where he fell off. Sorry, that's the reason he was fired. I got it wrong. He wasn't fired because he was drunk. He was drunk, so he fell off a 40-meter high scaffolding and landed on one leg, which completely pulverized itself, and so he couldn't work anymore. And so through a series of accidents, he's now in this horrible situation. But he's a beautiful character, because he just doesn't give a shit. And that's beautiful. He's just happy with his life and his art and his circumstance, and if he dies, he dies, and he just couldn't care less. And George Orwell constantly talks about, he says once or twice, sorry, not constantly, that he wishes he could be more like him. That everyone could be a bit more like Bozo. And there's also Boris in Paris, who's a hilarious Russian character, who gets him into a few scraps, and they get scammed once or twice because Orwell, pretending to be a journalist, shows up, and there's this secret communist meeting, which I thought was hilarious because Orwell hates communism, where he was given the offer of, they had to sign up membership to the Communist Party, and then he was to write as an English correspondent on English politics for this Russian paper, which was all a scam. But there's this conversation leading into it where Boris is like, there's this whole conversation leading into it where Boris tells Orwell to write for this paper, and Orwell's like, I don't know anything about politics, I can't write about politics. And he's like, oh, that's fine, just grab what's that paper that they always hand out on the street? I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to put in a random name here. Daily Sun? And he was like, I can't talk about the Daily Sun, they hate the communists. Like, I can't write about that, they'd kill me. And he was like, oh, well then, if that's what they write about, then just write the opposite, it's easy. And it's just this hilarious interaction of this harebrained scheme to try to get them both food, because they're both starving at this point in Paris. And so there is this almost dark comedy about it at times. But yeah, it's beautifully written. And Orwell has really pulled off a masterstroke by not aiming anything. He's not trying to force a narrative at all. He just tells you what happened. He narrates the reality, and you can make up your own mind about whether that's an acceptable reality or not. And it's entirely up to you. It's entirely up to you. And so whilst I found it bleak, because I applied it to my current world, because I think, talk about the word tramp for dull bludger, and you have modern Australia. You don't quite have the spikes and things like that, but there are similar systems in place to keep people down. We have, right now with coronavirus, I was looking up this morning, I hope these statistics are right, because I do not want to be one to spread misinformation, and I'm happy for anyone to correct me if they're wrong, that employment's at 6.8%, which I believe they were saying was 900,000 people, a bit over, and that jobs are less than 200,000, so that there are just 700,000 people who there are no jobs for. There's just nothing for them. And what we are doing have just done or will be doing in the coming months is cutting JobSeeker. So now the people who have no possible way of finding a job also have no possible way to survive. And I feel like if the people making those decisions had read this book, they'd think twice. Or maybe they wouldn't, and they're doing it intentionally, and are completely aware of it, and would use this book as justification of how well it works. I don't know. I don't want to turn this into a political video. Maybe it's inevitable. But this book is incredible. If you do want to read it just as a book, just as a jaunt around Paris and London, go for it. There's some fun stuff in here. There is. It's hard to say, but Now, Orwell isn't trying to make you feel miserable for him, so I don't think there's anything wrong with not feeling miserable for him, if that's just not what you want out of a book. I will say I gave it a 5-star because of the political connotations and because of all this other stuff that I loved about it, and how angry it made me. But if it was just a book without all those bits and just talking about his life in London, I'd say it's a 3.5 or a 4. He paints the scenery well. He paints these brilliant characters who have a life of their own. He really does these brilliant contrasts between English society and French society. And one thing that's hilarious, he does a chapter all about swearing and the changing of language from in the past few years and the different swear words. I will say I really hate that almost all of it, not because of Orwell, probably because of some editor somewhere, has been censored, so you can't actually see what the words are. So, he talks for 20, for like half a page about how this word has replaced this word, but you don't know what either of the words are. It's still good. It's still great analysis, and he does talk a few of those chapters just about, I'm just going to talk about this for a bit. And they're good chapters. And the story isn't meant to be bleak, and it just talks about him finding his way in the world in this situation that I think of as dreadful and unnecessary and unfair. But those are my words, not his. And you might not come to the same conclusion. And I hope I can leave this off. The point of these book chats is I want people to read them more, not less. I don't want people to watch this video and be like, okay, I get the gist, I don't need to read it. That's the opposite of what I want. The absolute opposite of what I want. I want everyone to read this book. And what I will say is, I can totally see people reading this who just aren't as aware of the situation around these issues in the modern world, and thus kind of being disassociated from it, which is fine. But I do challenge anyone to read this book without it making them think at least a little bit about the world around us and about what it means to be poor and the people who in this world today are poor. Because Orwell just finds a way to paint what are such complicated economical and socio-political situations in a way that is just life, because they are. He just lived them. He's not trying to give you some spiel or essay or philosophy article talking about why something is the way it is. He just says, this is how it is, and I know because I was there, and this is what happens, and that's it. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say, so I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. This is the kind of video I like to do. This is the kind of video I want to do more of, just talking a bit more in depth on the books I read. And they're not all going to be this long, because I don't always plan on having that much to say, and so maybe sometimes videos will be short, and that's cool. But yeah, this is a brilliant book that talks about very serious issues. But it does them in such a non-serious way, in a non-confrontational way, that they are so digestible, and it's just this genius move of making all the work of trying to understand it and trying to understand what's wrong with it entirely in your court. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. You can just ignore it and move on if you want to, and that's entirely your prerogative. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you did like this video, and if you like this style of video, because, feedback is always appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. Please read Down and Out in Paris by George Orwell. I do think you'll get something from it. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.